Today we are going to complete our evolution notes. Let me remind you that you can pause and rewind the video at any point throughout today's lesson. Let's get started. As you should have learned from the previous video, both Charles Darwin and Alfred Wallace concluded that life forms all descended from a common ancestor. There are several ideas that support common ancestry that we will discuss today. One support is the presence of molecular homologies. What do you think that means? Well, remember, your word root homo means same. So molecular homologies are things like DNA that organisms have in common with each other. So if we are comparing the DNA of two organisms, the more similarities of DNA sequences they have in common, the more closely related those organisms are. Let's compare the partial DNA sequence of the cytochrome C protein between a human, a chimpanzee, a horse, a rattlesnake, a fruit fly, and a sunflower. The question says, the data below shows the order of a part of the DNA sequence of several organisms. This data shows that the greatest difference is between which two groups of organisms. So, since we're looking at which two are the least related, we have to count the differences in the data table below. This table actually breaks up the DNA sequence by 3 nucleotide bases. Remember, that's what we call a codon. So we're actually going to read this column by column. Let's focus on the first column. Notice as how you read down the column, all the organisms share the same codon, GGU. Let's move on to the second column. Again, all organisms share GAU in common. The third column. Notice how all the organisms except the sunflower have the sequence GUC. The sunflower has CCC. That's one difference. Circle it on your paper. Let's move on. The fourth column. Once again, the sunflower has ACG while all the others have GAG. Circle the difference. The fifth column. The sunflower has ACG and everyone else has AAG. That's 3 differences already. The sixth column. All the same. Let's move on to the seventh column. Again, the sunflower has GCG and everyone else has AAG. Go ahead and circle it on your paper. The last column. The sunflower, yet again, is different. GCG instead of AAG like all the others. So how many differences did we find? Go ahead and count them up right now and write it on the side of the table. You should have counted 5 differences between the sunflower and the rest of the organisms. So let's answer the question now. Which 2 groups of organisms had the greatest difference in DNA sequences? A. Mammals and non-mammals. B. Plants and animals. C. Warm-blooded and cold-blooded animals. Or D. Reptiles and insects. Well, the sunflower is obviously a plant. What about the others? A human, chimpanzee, horse, rattlesnake, a fruit fly? Those are all animals. So the correct answer should be B, plants and animals. A tool that we can use to show how closely related organisms are is the cladogram. The closer the organisms are on the cladogram, the more related they are. Here we have 4 species that have all evolved from a common ancestor. Which is species 3 more genetically similar to? Species 3 is closest on the cladogram to species 4. So species 3 and 4 are most similar. Another idea that supports common ancestry is the presence of an anatomical homology. Again, remember that homo means same. Anatomical has something to do with anatomy, which is what? The study of an organism's structure and their parts. Homologous structures are features that are similar in structure but appear in different organisms and have different functions. So, same structure, different function. Put a star by that on your notes right now. The most common examples of homologous structures are the forelimbs of vertebrates. A vertebrate is an organism that has a backbone. Check out this picture showing the forelimbs of a human, a cat, a whale, and a bat. Remember, homologous structures are similar structures but used for different functions. So, the penguin uses its flipper for swimming, the alligator uses its leg for swimming but also walking on land. The bat uses its wings for flying. Would we use our arms for flying? Not unless you're Superman. Our arms are used for movement, balancing, grabbing, holding, and so on. Notice how these four organisms have several bones in common: the humerus, the radius, ulna, carpals, metacarpals, and phalanges. So we just talked about homologous structures, those that are the same structure but have different functions in organisms. Now let's talk about analogous structures. These are different structures that are inherited from different ancestors that resemble each other because they serve a similar function. Some examples would be the wings of birds versus the wings of insects, or the fins of fish versus the flippers of whales. Basically, it's the opposite of homologous. Different structure, but sharing the same function. Put a star by different structure, same function. This is very important. You need to know the difference between the two. Vestigial structures are remains of a structure that has reduced in size because it is no longer serving an important function. For example, the human appendix or wisdom teeth. Another support of common ancestry is when different groups have similar embryo structures. For example, zebrafish, chickens, dogs, humans, and skunk embryos go through a stage where they have slits and arches in their necks like the gill slits and gill arches of fish. These structures are not gills and do not develop into gills in chicks, humans, dogs, and skunks, but the fact that they are so similar to gill structures in fish at this point in development supports the idea that these share a common ancestor with fish. Fossils are preserved remains of traces of ancient organisms, like when impressions of leaves are made in rocks or mosquitoes are trapped in amber. Even after an organism has become extinct, evidence of those species may be found in fossil layers. Looking at layers of rock, the more primitive layers, meaning ancient, are found at the bottom. The most modern new layers would be towards the top. So, in this picture, fossils in layer B are older than those found in layer F. Let's compare the skulls of a few animals. Which are the most distantly related to the other three? Which is the most different than the others? Notice how the mouth of the species in choice A is a lot different than the others? This species would be a very distant relative of the other three. Alright, this is important. An adaptation is something that makes an organism more successful in their environment. They either have adaptations to make them fit for the environment or they don't. In a way, the environment selects who is most fit. If you have lots of fur and live in a tundra, you are fit to live there because it's cold. But if you have lots of fur and live in the desert, you are not as fit because it's hot there, so the environment selects against you. There are three types of adaptations: structural, physiological, and behavioral. Structural adaptations are changes in the structure of an organism's body parts. For example, thorns, spines, disruptive coloration, eye spots, camouflage, and mimicry. Camouflage is when a species blends in with its environment, helping it to escape from predators, like a walking stick. Here's a modern-day example of evolution with the peppered moth. Most peppered moths were actually light-colored in the past. This allowed them to camouflage themselves against light-colored trees and lichens. But because of pollution during the Industrial Evolution in England, many of the lichens died and the trees became blackened by soot. This caused the light-colored moths to die off because they were easily seen against a dark background by predators. Because of this change in the environment, dark moths actually became more fit to their environment and were more successful than the light-colored moths because of their ability to hide on the darkened trees. Mimicry is when one species copies another species. Physiological adaptations are changes in an organism's metabolic processes, like when bacteria become resistant to antibiotics, or insects becoming resistant to pesticides. Okay, I want you to star this whole section. This is why it's important to always finish an antibiotic when the doctor prescribes you one. Let's say your doctor gives you an antibiotic that you take for 10 days, but after 5 days you feel better. You should still finish it even if you feel better. Otherwise, bacteria will start to build up resistance to it. Let's say you stopped after day 5 and then a month later you get sick again and the doctor prescribes you the same antibiotic. It may not work as well the second time because the bacteria could have built up resistance to it in your body. This is another reason why we have to make new antibiotics and can't use the same ones forever. The same goes for insect resistance. Over time, insects become resistant to insecticides, making them less effective against insects. And the third type of adaptations are behavioral. These are changes in an organism's response to their environment. Some examples would be spiders spinning webs, birds making danger signals, mating rituals, and hibernation.